Yeah, subscribe to the channel. When he passed by the gardener, the millionaire was paralyzed when he saw his necklace, the same one his son was wearing when he disappeared many years ago. Daniel, a young worker and dedicated, lives in the shadow of an unknown past. He grew up in an orphanage, and at years old, he went out to face the world. The only clue to his past is a moon-shaped necklace that he has always worn. Daniel began working as a gardener in Roberto Gonzalez's mansion. A rich and respected businessman decided to find his place in the world. Daniel left the orphanage with nothing more than the hanging and the hope of a better future. He went through several difficulties until, finally, he found employment as a gardener in Roberto Gonzalez's mansion. On his first day, I felt a mixture of nervousness and enthusiasm as I walked through the vast gardens of the property. Upon arrival, Daniel was greeted by Manuel Lopez, the mansion's mayor. Manuel, a severe and authoritarian man, looked at Daniel with distrust. "I hope you know what you are doing," Manuel said with a cold tone. "The gardens of this mansion require dedication and perfection." Daniel, determined to prove his worth, trusted him. He immediately began to work, admiring the beauty of the flowers and shrubs that the exuberant gardens composed. Day after day, he dedicated himself to taking care of each plant with a smear, always seeking perfection. Despite his effort, Daniel constantly faced the criticism of Manuel, who always seemed to find something wrong in his work. From the way he pruned the plants to the way he watered the flowers, Manuel was always ready to complain. Still, Daniel kept calm and continued to focus on his tasks, determined to do the best he could. One morning, while he was working in a rose garden, Daniel noticed the arrival of a luxurious car at the entrance of the mansion. Roberto Gonzalez had returned from one of his frequent business trips. It was the first time Daniel saw the boss up close. Roberto was a man of impressive presence, but with a gentle and observant gaze. Daniel continued his work, out of curiosity for Roberto. His goal was simple: to do his job in the best possible way and perhaps one day discover more about his past. Working at Roberto Gonzalez's mansion was more than a job. It was an opportunity to start unraveling the mysteries of his origin. The day ended with Daniel tired but satisfied with the progress made in the garden. By saving his tools, he reflected on the new phase of his life. Working in Roberto Gonzalez's mansion seemed to be a new beginning, an opportunity to build a future while trying to unravel his past. Thus, Daniel went home, with renewed hope and determination to continue his work with dedication. Without knowing that the casual encounter with Roberto and the necklace on his neck were about to change his life forever. In Roberto Gonzalez's mansion, Daniel quickly became familiar with his routine as a gardener. However, his work was not without difficulties, mainly due to Manuel Lopez, the strict and authoritarian mayor of the house, making critical and unnecessary comments about his work. "You need to do a better job, Daniel. These bushes are a shame," Manuel often said, without offering any useful guidance. Daniel kept calm, focusing on his tasks and trying not to be shaken by constant criticism. He believed that his work would speak for itself and hoped to gain Manuel's respect over time. However, the tension between them only increased. One afternoon, a strong storm swept the region. The torrential rain and strong winds caused damage in the mansion's garden, spreading leaves and branches everywhere. Daniel, determined to keep the garden in order, worked tirelessly under the storm, trying to minimize the damage. Manuel, watching from one of the windows of the mansion, he did not miss the opportunity to criticize. He went out to the garden, guarded under a big umbrella, and began to reprimand Daniel in front of the other employees. "You can't even keep a garden in order during a storm? This is unacceptable," Manuel screamed. His voice was imposed on the sound of the rain. You should know that Roberto Gonzalez's mansion garden demands perfection at all times. The other employees, who were also trying to deal with the storm, stopped to watch the uncomfortable scene. Daniel, soaked and exhausted, tried to justify himself. "I'm doing my best, Mr. Lopez. The storm was unexpected, but I'm working hard to clean everything." Manuel, however, was not willing to listen. He continued to humiliate Daniel, criticizing every little detail. Returning unexpectedly from a business trip, he arrived at the mansion. When he left his car, he noticed the commotion in the garden and approached to see what was happening. "Manuel, what is happening here?" Roberto asked firmly, interrupting Manuel's diatribe. Manuel, surprised, tried to justify himself. "Mr. Gonzalez, I'm just making sure that the garden is in perfect condition. But this gardener is failing at his tasks." Roberto looked at Daniel, who was clearly doing his best amidst the adversities. Then he turned to Manuel with a disapproving look. "I can't stand this kind of behavior, Manuel. Everyone here works hard, especially in difficult conditions like this one. Daniel is doing an excellent job and doesn't deserve to be treated." The other employees watched in silence, impressed by Roberto's posture. Manuel, visibly uncomfortable, murmured an excuse and left. Daniel, relieved and grateful, thanked Roberto. "Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. I thank you very much for defending me." Roberto smiled lightly and put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Continue with the good work, Daniel. We are all under pressure, but mutual respect is essential." Since that day, Daniel felt a new wave of motivation. He knew he would face challenges, especially with Manuel, but he also knew he had Roberto's support. That gave him the strength to continue his work with dedication, determined to prove his worth and perhaps discover more about his past on the road. After Roberto's intervention, the situation in the mansion seemed to have calmed down. Daniel continued his work in the garden, feeling more valued and motivated. However, the scene of the conflict left a lasting impression on Roberto. He could not ignore the sense of familiarity he felt when he saw the moon-shaped necklace on Daniel's neck. The next morning, while Daniel was pruning the roses, Roberto approached him, willing to clarify his doubts. Observing the young gardener working with dedication, he decided to start a conversation. "Daniel, can I talk to you for a moment?" Roberto asked with a gentle tone. Daniel left what he was doing and turned to Roberto, cleaning his hands on his pants. "Of course, Mr. Gonzalez. How can I help you?" Roberto pointed to the moon-shaped pendant that Daniel always wore. "That pendant? It's very beautiful and peculiar. Where did you get it?" Daniel looked at the pendant, surprised by the question. "I've always had it, sir. The caretakers of the orphanage where I grew up said that they found me with it when I was a child in a park. I never knew its origin." Roberto felt a strong emotional connection when he heard Daniel's story. He could not help but feel that this pendant had a special meaning. His memories of the past began to emerge, bringing to the surface buried feelings a long time ago. "You said you were found in a park?" asked Roberto, trying to keep calm. "Yes," Daniel answered. "They found me alone, without any information about my parents. This necklace was the only thing I had." Roberto remained silent for a moment, processing the information. He recalled a tragic episode in his life when his son disappeared. The moon-shaped pendant was a special gift he had given to the child. "Daniel, there is something about that pendant that I need to investigate. Can I see it closer?" Roberto asked, trying to hide the emotion in his voice. Daniel, intrigued, took off the pendant and gave it to Roberto. While he was examining the object, Roberto felt a wave of emotions take over him. He knew he needed to discover more about Daniel and his connection with the past. "Daniel," Roberto said, returning the pendant, "I will ask you to be patient. There is something very important that I need to verify. I promise that soon I will have answers for you." Daniel felt, even without fully understanding what was happening, but trusting Roberto, He felt that something significant was about to be revealed, something that could change his life forever. With a heavy heart, but full of determination, Roberto moved away, knowing that the journey to unravel the mystery of Daniel's past had just begun. He was determined to discover the truth, regardless of how painful or surprising it could be. Roberto retired to his office in the mansion, disturbed by the recent revelations. Sitting on his leather chair, he closed his eyes and let his memories invade him. The images of his past, repressed for a long time, returned with a painful intensity. It was a sunny afternoon many years ago. Roberto returned home with his son, Daniel, just 3 years after a pleasant day in the park. Smiling and playing with his moon-shaped pendant, a special gift from Roberto. The pendant symbolized the eternal bond between father and son, something Roberto could never forget. While driving through the quiet streets, Roberto felt a sudden sense of danger. 3 men in hoods emerged out of nowhere, blocking the road with a vehicle. In an instant, they surrounded Roberto's car with weapons in hand. The panic took over Roberto, but tried to keep the calm for Daniel. "Please, take what you want, but leave my son alone," Roberto cried with a trembling voice. The thieves did not show mercy. They dragged Roberto out of the car and beat him violently until he was unconscious on the sidewalk. Roberto felt an excruciating pain, and before losing consciousness, he heard the sound of the car engine starting, taking his son. Hours later, Roberto woke up in the hospital, confused and in pain. When he realized that Daniel was not with him, despair consumed him. He tried to get up, but his wounds were too serious. The doctors and nurses tried to calm him down, but Roberto knew something terrible had happened. The following days were a whirlwind of agony and desperate search. Roberto, although weakened, did everything possible to find his son. He contacted the police, hired private detectives, and spread the disappearance of Daniel in all possible media. Gina, his wife, was devastated and his health was fragile, only worsened the stress. Finally, after days of anguish, the police found clues about the thieves. They had abandoned Daniel in a park, without any documents or any clues about his identity. The local authorities took the boy to an orphanage, but without knowing his true identity. He was registered only as Daniel. Roberto and Gina searched all the orphanages in the city, but never found his son. The pain of loss and guilt corroded Roberto daily. He sank into work as a way to deal with suffering, but he never lost hope of finding Daniel someday. Now, years later, when looking at the necklace on the young gardener's neck, all those painful memories came back with full force. Roberto knew there was an undeniable connection between that necklace and his lost son. He was determined to discover the truth, no matter how hard it was. With tears in his eyes, Roberto made a silent promise to himself. "I will find the truth, Daniel. I promise to discover what really happened and bring you back home." Decided to discover the truth about Daniel, Roberto decided to start a thorough investigation into the past of the young man. He began by consulting old records, looking for any clues that could connect Daniel to his missing son. Every document that passed through his hands was examined carefully and with hope. Roberto knew he couldn't do this alone. He hired a private detective, a man of trust who had already worked for him in the past. Together, they revisited the kidnapping case, analyzing details that could have been passed on high at the time. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Daniel continued to work diligently in the gardens, outside of the investigations that Roberto was carrying out. Roberto's words of support after the incident with Manuel had renewed his motivation. Roberto began his search by revisiting the orphanage where Daniel had grown up. She talked to old caretakers and employees who still remembered the child found in the park. One of the caretakers, Dona Marta, an old woman with a generous heart, remembered that day well. "I remember it as if it were yesterday," said Donna Marta, while I was serving a tea to Roberto. They found Daniel alone in the park, with that moon-shaped pendant. He was so small and scared. Roberto felt a knot in his throat when he heard this, but he kept his composure. Donna Marta, was there any record about him, or any clue where he could have come from? The caretaker denied with her head sadly. Unfortunately, no. She did not have any documents, and no one came to look for him. We did what we could to take care of him, but his past was always a mystery. Despite the initial disappointment, Roberto did not give up. He and the detective began to investigate records of the disappearance of the time, trying to find some connection between the kidnapping of his son and the appearance of Daniel in the park. Each track was meticulously followed, but often it was in alleys without exit. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Daniel began to notice that something was different. Roberto seemed more thoughtful and distant, although he continued to treat him with the same kindness. Daniel wondered what could be happening, but decided not to ask, focusing on his responsibilities. One day, while he was organizing old documents, the detective found a police report that mentioned an abandoned car found near the park where they found Daniel. The report detailed that the car was registered on behalf of Roberto Gonzalez and that there were signs of struggle in the place. Roberto read the report with a fast heart. This is my car. It is proof that we were close. Daniel must be my son, he thought, feeling a wave of hope and anxiety. Decided to obtain a definitive confirmation, Roberto planned a DNA test. He knew that would be the only way to prove without any doubt that Daniel was his lost son. However, he wanted to approach the matter carefully so as not to scare the young man. As the investigations progressed, Roberto began to observe Daniel with a new perspective. Each gesture, each expression reminded him of his little son. The resemblance was undeniable, but Roberto knew he needed concrete evidence before sharing his suspicions with Daniel. The DNA test would be the key to revealing the truth. Roberto was determined to keep going with it, anxious and fearful for what he could discover. He knew that the truth could change his life forever, and he was ready to face any consequence. With a heart full of hope, Roberto took the first steps to perform the DNA test, preparing for what was to come. Daniel, still unconscious of the investigations, continued his work in the mansion, not knowing that his past was about to be revealed. In the days that followed, Roberto began spending more time with Daniel. He found excuses to go out to the garden, observe the young man's work, and eventually help with some tasks. Roberto's presence in the garden became a pleasant routine for both. Daniel, initially surprised, began to appreciate the company of the boss, who always showed interest in learning more about gardening. "You have a special talent for this, Daniel," Roberto commented one day while admiring a field of newly planted flowers. "Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. I have always liked to take care of plants. It is something that brings me peace," Daniel replied with a shy smile. As they spent more time together, a special connection began to form. Roberto felt a growing affection for Daniel and the young gardener for his part. She began to see Roberto not only as an employee, but also as a mentor. They discussed about life, work, and occasionally about dreams and hopes for the future. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Gina, Roberto's wife, noticed the change in the behavior of her husband. He was more present, more involved with the house routine, especially with the garden. Gina began to worry about the sudden change and decided to approach the matter with Roberto. "Roberto, I have noticed that you have spent a long time with Daniel in the garden," Gina commented one night while they were having dinner. "What's going on?" Roberto knew that he could not continue to keep his suspicions secret. He looked into Gina's eyes, feeling the urgency to share everything with her. "We need to talk, Gina. There is something very important that I must tell you," he said, taking his hand. Intrigued and a little anxious, Gina followed Roberto to the office. There, he closed the door and began to tell all the discoveries and feelings that tormented him since the day he saw the moon hanging on Daniel's neck. "Gina, since I saw that hanging, I can't stop thinking that Daniel could be our son," said Roberto, with a voice full of emotion. "I started investigating and found many coincidences that I cannot ignore." Gina remained silent, processing Roberto's words. Tears began to roll down her face as she remembered her lost son. The hope that one day almost died out now reawakened with force. "Roberto, do you really think he is our Daniel?" "I have no doubts, Gina, but we need concrete evidence. I'm planning a DNA test to confirm it. Only then can we be sure," Roberto responded, holding Gina's hands firmly. Gina feeling a mixture of hope and fear. "Then let's do it. We need to know the truth." From that moment on, Roberto and Gina got even closer to the hope that Daniel was really his son. While they were waiting for the DNA test results, Roberto continued to strengthen his bond with Daniel, trying to prepare the young man for the possibility of a revelation that would change his lives forever. Gina, on the other hand, began to observe Daniel with special affection, although trying not to raise suspicions. Increasingly convinced that he was, in fact, the son they had lost so many years ago. The days passed slowly and expectations increased. The relationship between Roberto and Daniel became increasingly strong, creating a bond that transcended the simple relationship between employer and employee. Both felt that something deep connected them, although they still did not fully understand the magnitude of that connection. Roberto was determined to unravel the mystery once and for all. The coincidences and suspicions were too strong to be ignored. With the help of the private detective, he continued investigating all possible clues. During one of his searches, he found an old retired policeman, Mr. Ramirez, who had worked on the case of the child found in the park years ago. When he made an appointment with Mr. Ramirez in a local cafe, Roberto felt a mixture of anxiety and hope. When the retired policeman arrived, Roberto went straight to the point. "Mr. Ramirez, I thank you for meeting with me. I need to know more about the child who was found in the park years ago. I think he could be my son," said Roberto, trying to contain his anxiety. An advanced-age man, but with still attentive eyes, looked at Roberto with curiosity. "I remember that case well. It was one of the saddest I've ever seen. The boy was alone, scared, and there was no clue about his identity, except for a moon-shaped pendant." Roberto felt a cold step when he heard the description. "That pendant still has it. The boy is now a young man who works for me. I need to know if it really is my son," Mr. Ramirez answered, understanding the urgency in Roberto's voice. "I remember we did everything we could to find that child's parents. Unfortunately, we never succeeded. But now that he mentions it, his name was on the records as the owner of the car abandoned near the park. I always thought there was a connection." The pieces of the puzzle began to fit. Roberto felt a wave of renewed hope, but he knew he needed concrete evidence. "Mr. Ramirez, this is crucial for me and my wife. We need a definitive confirmation. I'm planning to do a DNA test. Do you think that could finally give us the answers?" The retired policeman agreed. "Yes, a DNA test would be the irrefutable proof. If you need more information, I'm here to help in whatever is possible." With that, Roberto deeply thanked Mr. Ramirez and returned to the mansion with a sense of urgency. He knew that the only way to confirm his suspicions would be through DNA testing. Upon arriving at the mansion, he found Gina anxiously waiting. "Roberto, what did you discover?" Gina asked, with the obvious concern in her voice. Roberto took the hands of his wife and explained everything about the meeting with Mr. Ramirez. "Gina, everything points to the fact that Daniel is really our son. But we need definitive evidence. I will do a DNA test to confirm it." Gina felt it, with emotion shining in her eyes. "Let's do it, Roberto. We need to know the truth." Roberto then went to Daniel's meeting. That was in the garden as usual. He knew he had to approach the young man carefully. "Daniel, can I talk to you for a moment?" Roberto asked, trying to hide the emotion in his voice. Daniel left what he was doing and approached. "Of course, Mr. Gonzalez, what happened?" Roberto breathed deeply before speaking. "Daniel, there is something very important that I need to tell you. Since I saw your necklace, I felt that there could be a connection between us. I talked to some people and gathered information that indicates that you could be my missing son. I want to do a DNA test to be sure." Daniel was stunned, not knowing what to say. "Mr. Gonzalez, it's a big surprise. I've always wanted to know about my past, but I never imagined something like this." Roberto put a hand on Daniel's shoulder, offering him a comforting smile. "I understand that this is a lot to process, but we need to know the truth. Let's do this test and discover once and for all." Daniel agreed, still stunned by the revelation. In the following days, the DNA test was carried out, and the wait for the results seemed endless. Roberto, Gina, and Daniel lived in a roller coaster of emotions, each one dealing with their expectations and fears. Finally, the day of the results arrived. Roberto held the envelope in his hands, feeling the weight of the truth that was about to be revealed. He looked at Gina and Daniel, both equally anxious, and opened the envelope. The reading of the result confirmed what his hearts already knew. Daniel was really the lost son of Roberto and Gina. The emotion took over the room. Gina hugged Daniel, with tears of happiness rolling down his face. Roberto felt a mixture of relief and joy as never before. The truth was finally clear, and the family was reunited again. Daniel woke up the next morning feeling different. The revelation of his true identity still resonated in his mind, but he was determined to adapt to his new life as Roberto's son and Gina Gonzalez. He knew it would be a transition full of challenges, but also of opportunities and personal growth. Roberto and Gina gave him all the necessary support. They decided it was time for Daniel to join the family business, not only as a team member, but in a position of trust. Roberto saw in Daniel an unexploded potential. "Daniel, we want you to be an integral part of our company," Roberto said, while he had breakfast with Gina and Daniel. "There is a lot to learn, but I think you have the capacity and intelligence to stand out here." Daniel felt it, feeling honored and a little nervous. "Thank you, Dad. I'll do my best. I'm looking forward to learning and contributing." In the following weeks, Daniel was introduced to the corporate environment of the company Gonzalez. He went through various areas, learning about finances, operations, and marketing. Each department offered a new perspective and a new set of skills to acquire. Roberto, always next to Daniel, guided him with patience and enthusiasm. The employees of the company, although initially surprised by Daniel's arrival, soon saw his dedication and desire to learn. However, not everyone was happy with the new situation. Manuel Lopez, the ex-mayor of the mansion, was watching with growing discontent. Manuel never overcame the fact that Roberto defended Daniel in the garden, and now, seeing him elevated to a position of prestige in the company, his envy and rage increased. He began to conspire against Daniel, trying to undermine his credibility and create conflicts within the company. One day, while Daniel was checking important documents in the office, Manuel entered with an expression of false cordiality. "Daniel, you look very busy," said Manuel with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Do you need help? Maybe I can guide you on how things work around here." Daniel, without suspecting Manuel's intentions, accepted the offer. "Of course, Manuel, all help is welcome. I'm trying to understand these financial reports, but some points are still confusing to me." Manuel, taking advantage of the opportunity, began to give wrong and deceiving advice, trying to cause errors that could harm Daniel. However, Daniel, with his dedication and intelligence, managed to identify the inconsistencies and correct the errors before they caused any real damage. Perceiving the growing tension, he called Daniel for a private conversation. "Daniel, I've noticed that Manuel has tried to interfere in your work. I want you to know that I fully trust you and your skills. Don't let him discourage you." Daniel thanked him for the support and decided to face Manuel directly. "Manuel, I know you've tried to sabotage me. I'm here to work hard and learn, not to cause problems. I hope we can find a way to work together." Manuel, surprised by the value of Daniel, had no choice but to step back, at least for now. However, his inner anger only increased, and he continued to look for ways to knock Daniel down. Meanwhile, Daniel continued to stand out in the company. He participated in important meetings, he contributed with innovative ideas, and he gained the trust of his colleagues at work. Roberto and Gina watched with pride the growth of their son, seeing in him a reflection of the qualities that they always valued. The months passed, and despite Manuel's attempts, Daniel consolidated himself as a capable and respected leader. He learned to navigate corporate challenges and strengthen his position within the company, always counting on the unbreakable support of his parents. At the end of each day, Daniel reflected on his path. He knew that there was still much to discover and many challenges to face, but he was ready to face them, confident in his place in the Gonzalez family and in his future in the company. Thus, Daniel continued to adjust to his new life, finding strength and purpose in his newly discovered identity, while Roberto and Gina celebrated the presence of their son in their lives, sure that the future was bright for all. Manuel Lopez, the mayor of the mansion, was increasingly resentful of Daniel's rise into the company of the Gonzalez family. Manuel's envy and resentment led him to plan sabotages against the young man, although his main functions were in the mansion and not in the company. Manuel began to use his position and influence in the mansion to create problems that would indirectly affect Daniel. He began to spread rumors among the employees of the mansion, hoping that the distrust would spread to the employees of the company. One morning, Manuel called some of the employees of the mansion for a conversation in the kitchen. "We need to do something about Daniel," Manuel said with a conspiracy tone. "He does not deserve the position he occupies. We are going to show Mr. Gonzalez that he is not capable." Who were afraid, but influenced by Manuel's authority, agreed to help him. They began to create small problems in the mansion, from intentional neglect of maintenance to the manipulation of Daniel's personal documents, trying to cause distractions and concerns that would affect his performance in the company. Daniel, on the other hand, adjusted to his new position in the company with determination and commitment. He was dedicated to learning everything possible about family business, participating in important meetings, and contributing with innovative ideas. However, he began to notice that small things went wrong, both in the mansion and in the company. One afternoon, when he reviewed an important report, Daniel noticed that some data was incorrect. He knew that he had verified the numbers several times. Confused, he decided to investigate more deeply and discovered that the original documents had been altered. This discovery put him on alert. Roberto, always attentive to Daniel's well-being, noticed the tension in his son. "Daniel, I've noticed that you're worried. What's going on?" Daniel explained the difficulties he had been facing, mentioning the inconsistencies in the documents and the small problems that arose in the mansion. Roberto, knowing Manuel's background, began to suspect the mayor. "I'll be aware of this, Daniel. Trust me," Roberto said, determined to protect his son and the company. Manuel, realizing that his actions had not yet caused the desired impact, decided to intensify his efforts. He began to manipulate the schedules of the mansion employees, creating confusions and delays that directly affected Daniel's routine. He also began sending fake information about Daniel to some key employees of the company, trying to sow doubts about his competition. Roberto, now more vigilant, noticed that problems always arose when Manuel was close. He decided to investigate more in depth. During a surprise inspection in Manuel's rooms, he found evidence of the manipulations, falsified documents, and detailed notes on Daniel's movements. With these evidence, Roberto called for a meeting with Manuel. "Manuel, we have to talk," Roberto said, keeping calm. "I found evidence that you have sabotaged Daniel and caused problems both in the mansion and in the company. This is unacceptable." Manuel tried to defend himself, but the evidence was irrefutable. "Mr. Gonzalez, I just wanted to protect the company. I don't think Daniel is ready." Roberto looked at Manuel firmly. "It's not your role to judge that. Your actions have shown that you have no better interest in our family and our company in mind. You are fired." Manuel's departure brought immediate relief to the mansion and the company. The employees who had been influenced by him began to work with more harmony and less tension. Daniel, now free from conspiracies, felt more confident and determined. With the continuous support of Roberto and Gina, Daniel solidified his position in the company, gaining the respect and admiration of his colleagues. He faced adversity with courage and proved that he was more than prepared for the challenges that would come. Roberto and Gina, proud of their son, knew that he was on the right path to become a capable and integral leader, someone who could take the family business to new heights. Manuel's plot had failed, and Daniel emerged stronger, ready for a bright future next to his family. The sun in the morning illuminated the Gonzalez mansion with a golden light, symbolizing a new beginning for the family. Daniel, now more confident in himself, walked through the hallways of the company with a firm and determined posture. He had overcome many challenges and was now ready to fully assume his responsibilities. Roberto and Gina, closely observing Daniel's progress, felt immense pride. Roberto, in particular, was satisfied to see that his son not only had talent, but also a strong and integral character. He knew that the company was in good hands. That afternoon, there was an important meeting scheduled to discuss the company's next steps. Daniel was prepared, having reviewed all the reports and strategic plans. He entered the meeting room with a confident presence, greeting executives and employees with a safe smile. "Good morning, everyone. Today we will discuss our growth strategies for the next quarter. I have some ideas that I think can take us to new levels." Daniel began by distributing the documents to each member of the team. While Daniel presented his ideas, it became clear that he had a clear and innovative vision for the company. His plans were well-founded and showed a deep understanding of the market. The employees, who could have doubted his skills before, now looked at him with respect and admiration. Roberto, sitting next to Daniel, watched every movement of his son with evident pride. He could not stop smiling when he saw how Daniel led the meeting with natural security. When the meeting ended, the applause were unanimous. Daniel had shown everyone that he was more than capable of leading the company. Later that day, Roberto and Gina organized a small celebration in the mansion to commemorate Daniel's success. The family and the closest friends met in the main hall, where an abundant table was prepared. The atmosphere was full of joy and relief, a feeling that the difficult times were finally behind them. Gina, with an emotional smile, she raised a glass of champagne. "Today we celebrate not only Daniel's success in the company, but also our family gathered. We are very proud of you, my son." Daniel, moved by his mother's words, stood up to speak. "Thank you, Mom, and thank you, Dad. None of this would be possible without your support and trust. I still have a lot to learn, but with you by my side, I know we can achieve great things together." Roberto put his hand on Daniel's shoulder. "We are together in this, son. You have shown that you are a true leader, and I know that our company and our family are in good hands with you." The celebration continued with laughter, lively conversations, and moments of reflection on the path they had taken. Daniel felt a deep gratitude for finally having found his family and for having the opportunity to be part of something so special. As the night progressed, Daniel, Roberto, and Gina moved away from the party for a moment and went to the garden. Where the stars shone intensely, they sat on a bench, appreciating the tranquility of the night and mutual company. "Look at those stars," said Gina, pointing to the sky. "They have always been there, even when we could not see them, just as our love and our hope that one day we would be together again." Roberto smiled and took Gina and Daniel's hands. "Life has brought us together again. And now, looking towards the future, I know we are strong, and we can face any challenge." Daniel felt, feeling a deep peace. "Yes, Dad, we are together and ready for what is to come." With that feeling of union and hope, the Gonzalez family looked to the future with optimism. They knew that, despite the adversities of the past, they were stronger and closer than ever. The company would prosper under the leadership of Daniel and the mansion. That one day it was a symbol of loss and sadness. Now it shone with love and joy. The outcome of his journey was a new beginning. Daniel, Roberto, and Gina, finally in peace, were ready to build a bright future together, sustained by the love and strength of a truly united family.